everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 18 of Monster, and last episode went a lot better than I thought it was going to. It was still tense, it was still crazy, and now we have the conception that Johan maybe has a split personality. We talked at great length about that in the last video. I have thoughts about that. You can go see the discussion from last week to talk about that. But I feel like we're starting a new arc wherever that's going to lead us. We're at episode 18 of 74, so 74, 75. So we got a long way to go, but I feel like we've entered a new arc with Monster. I don't really know if we can apply. I feel like by the time I get to the very end of the series, I'll apply like the 3 or 4 act structure with Monster, but I feel like the series is so long, it does that 3 or 4 act thing over and over again, right? Or at least it feels like it's going to. But I do have some comments before we start this episode that I'm pretty excited about. I woke up this morning, poured myself a cup of black coffee and was like, yes, let's watch Monster. It's cold outside. It's still winter. I'm like, yes, let's watch some wholesome family fun as we've experienced with Monster. I do want to talk about, though, the comments, though. Pedro Rafael, I thought this was great. Pedro Rafael says that Eva is German for Eve. So her deconstruction as a character at the beginning and ending happening in a garden feels very appropriate, right? I thought that was cool, like the Garden of Eden with Eve. It's great. So who is the snake and what's the apple? You know, you can deconstruct that metaphor as much as you want, that analogy, but I thought that was really cool. Alex Cornejo said in episode 15 that John and the Magi are technically pretty fitting for Wolf and the others, because even though they're not the disciples of like the disciples were for Jesus, they technically seemingly paved the way for Jesus to get his notoriety. So in that regard, it makes sense that the cult group kind of wants to be like the ones paving the way for Johan, even though Johan was like in the end going, no, I'm having none of it. Whatever. So I thought that was actually a good reference. So Alex, I'm glad you brought that up. Sunray pointed out, along with Killer Queen 2000, but first I'll talk about Sunray. Sunray pointing out that Lunge gets so obsessed, this is referring back to episode 14, gets so obsessed with his conclusions and wanting to solve the crime that he actually makes his lowercase truths his own and ignores any other possibility, which is kind of similar to Eva, actually. The downside is that they both like come to their own conclusions and they're unwilling to accept any other possibility, right? Which leads to some pretty extreme measures. Eva, in that sense, makes her lover, Tenma, out to be an idol. And Sunray talked about the idea that, you know, if you make people out to be idols, eventually you're going to become disappointed with them because it's going to crack under the pressure and they're not going to live up to your expectations. Again, I'm reading Heaven Official's Blessing right now. If you've not read that series, it's amazing. It's a donghua. But it deals with its main character kind of having that exact same problem that Tenma has, in which they are made up to be idols and they can't live up to this godly expectation, this flawless expectation. They can't live up to it. So I thought that was really fascinating. And also the idea that Lunge is such a weird character because, right, he presents himself as a detective. And when we first came on the scene, I was like, oh, he's kind of like L from Death Note or Sherlock. But Lunge doesn't really, he's not out to find the absolute truth. He's out to find the convenient truth that is going to fit what works for him and then move on to the next thing. Let's get the job done and go, which is kind of concerning, right? And it sort of makes him a much more interesting and kind of flawed detective, because you're like, well, wait a minute. You just think that Tenma is the killer because of X, Y, and Z, but you don't have any proof, and you're searching for proof that may or may not exist just because it's convenient for your own viewpoint. Wait, what? And so it's so fascinating, right? The idea that these characters in Monster are so flawed and human that it's kind of mind-blowing, with the exception of Johan. He's pretty chilling in his own right. And then finally, Killer Queen 2000 says the mangaka, again, gives a very flawed detective in Lunge. And I like that. I like that, because in Death Note, if you've watched that series, L kind of positions himself as, no, I'm the morally right character. And later on in the series, that thematic element is somewhat challenged and expanded upon, and I won't spoil Death Note for you if you've not seen it, but it gets expanded upon. But L very much presents himself as he believes he's in the right, and he does things kind of by the books. Lunge doesn't really do things by the books. He just does things in ways that he feels is the right way to do it, and that's kind of dangerous and fascinating. So I'm excited to see what else we're going to get with Lunge as we go, especially knowing now that he's not this, like, you know, spick and span detective. It's like, no, he does things in ways that are kind of, could be problematic. So interesting, right? But yeah, we're starting a new episode. I have no clue what's going to happen. Now we've entered, we have this theory about Johann that has been presented by Nina. I'm curious where it's going to go. Where's the story going to from here? Heckle and Dieter. Don't leave Dieter with Heckle. That should be the lesson we all learned. Heckle is not meant to watch a kid, and Dieter is not meant to be with Heckle. So I don't know what we're going to do at this point. I'm curious. So we'll find out, right? But I hope y'all are excited. I very much am. So we are going to start episode 18 of Monster. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Well, I just Monster, you've made me cry twice now. You've made me sob crocodile tears twice. What are we doing? And we're not even 20 episodes. We're not halfway through the series. We're barely even like a quarter of the way through the series. I should have known. The first like third of this episode, I was like, this is a pretty straightforward episode. We're not going to have much to talk about. I was like, there's not going to be much to talk about. It's just this sweet old man taking care of Anna. I guess I should call her Anna, I guess. I've been calling her Nina because that's what she's been. But I'm like, I should have been calling her Nina, but she's going by Anna now. So I guess y'all will just have to bear with me. I may call her Nina. I may call her Anna. I may call her Anna. Just work with me. So, but yeah, I was like, oh, Mr. Rosso seems really good. All I could think of was Porco Rosso, which is the Ghibli film. That's all I could think of. But I was like, this is a pretty straightforward episode. And then you slowly start to, the moment he turned to her when she asked him about shooting a gun, and he was like, oh, guns are terrible. The moment he said that, I was like, oh, something's happened in his past. And then the moment we see him watching the movie and crying, at that point, I was like, no, like, it was one of those things when you watch someone cry and you want to cry. Like, I've never had that experience with an animated show before where we're watching an animated character cry made me want to cry. But in that moment, it felt so real. And you were like, oh no, there's something under the surface here. It's really tragic. I don't know. And then it's something so simple. It's something so simple that he tells her. I'm glad he tells her these things. I feel like she needs to express that sugar comment to Tenma, because I'm afraid that Tenma's coffee is getting more and more bitter and it's losing the sugar. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that Tenma's drink is losing the sugar and he's losing this connection to the sweeter things in life, and he's getting more and more tied up in Johann, and it's making him more and more bitter. And I'm afraid it's like corrupting him, this obsession with him. And Nina realizing what he was saying to her at the end, I wanted her to hug him so bad. I was like, just jump off the train, give him a hug, and jump back on. It's not hard. It won't take you that long. And she doesn't do it. I was like, ugh. So I got Werther's. I've got like a smidgen of coffee left, but it's not much. I don't put sugar in my coffee because I try to cut back on the sweet part, but I do put creamer. I'll put creamer in coffee, but no sugar. Oh, man. Damn it. This episode just got me. But there are some things that work here in this episode, and so I did want to bring Whiteboard Coon out. I debated it. I was like, I don't know how much I'll write on Whiteboard Coon, but there is something to say about it, right? And the idea where we have Tenma over here, Tenma is convinced that Johann is talking about Johann having the two personalities. But like this episode shows us, and we talked about it in the last reaction, like this episode shows us, everyone has a second personality. everyone is capable of being like Johann. That's the scary thing. Everyone has a monster inside of them, right? That's kind of what Rosso gets at. Rosso is like, we all can be a monster. The thing of it is that the thing of it is realizing. And God, this is a theme that's come up in I don't know how many anime I've been watching. It definitely comes up in Attack on Titan. I was thinking of Attack on Titan while watching this, being like, oh, that Isayama has probably watched Monster, I'm assuming, because this theme came up and I was like, oh, that's Attack on Titan. That's a huge theme. Realizing the beauty and simple sweetness in the world. And I'll put in a humanity as well. Yeah, that's kind of his thing. The moment he realized that this man was enjoying his life, he was putting the 5 sugars in, he was taking something that was bitter and making it sweet. The idea of making the world better, right? Making something bitter sweeter, and realizing that you have that ability. Like that, I feel like that's a big, not to spoil Attack on Titan, I don't feel like putting a spoiler thing up here, but one of the themes of Attack on Titan is the idea that the world is cruel, that the world is a bad place, and that there are bad people in the world. And yes, that can very much be the case. The world can be cruel and there's bad people in it. But it's the idea that we ourselves can do little things to make that world better and to make it something worth living for. That's the thing. And this man that he was assigned to murder was just taking something as simple as 5 sugars and being like, if I just add a little bit more sweetness to it, a little bit more sweetness to something so bitter, it'll make it tolerable and make it worth living. And so I feel like that's such a big integral message in this show, that again, this series takes one episode, one side character. We met Mr. Rosso for one episode and I'm already like, I love this man. And he imparts this wisdom that is so powerful and feels like it's central to the entire series, right? I'm going to make just like little side notes up here of little trends and things the mangaka does. And one is the idea of these murderers or hired hitmen wanting to move forward. I won't say with nonviolence, because Hugo still trains people to kill. He still does that, but he was a mercenary. But he moves forward in the fact of taking on the little girl. And that's kind of the sweetness that he adds to his life, is taking her on and trying to like right the wrongs that he's done. And for Rosso, it's trying to make the world better and just add a little bit of comfort food to these people's lives, like do something sweet, like start this restaurant, like trying to make a living for himself and not touch a gun again. We'll talk about that when we get to that scene. But yeah, just the idea of these characters just moving forward. And Tenma is so obsessed. Tenma is so obsessed with Johann at this point that I feel like he's starting to forget about the sugar. Because, I mean, from the start of the series, Tenma was wanting to be that person that would make someone's world better. He wanted to add the sugar to their drink for them and give them hope. And now Tenma is starting to spiral, chasing after Johann. He's forgetting that. And I feel what makes me nervous is that Nina has gotten the message. Nina's gotten it. She kind of knows what's at stake here, and she's trying to keep a hold of her humanity and her morality. But I feel like Tenma doesn't have her around to like share this story. So what do we do about that, right? Because Hegel's not exactly a great role model for Tenma to talk to about that sort of thing. And role model's not the right word for it. And Dieter's a kid, so he really needed Nina and Rosso to kind of talk to, but he didn't get that. So, But 5 sugars. Okay. So we go back to this. I honestly was expecting Lunge to be in this episode. I was expecting Lunge to show up and interview her, but it seems like he's just a step behind. And maybe her part of the story is not something he wants to hear. if he knew about the Anna Liebert part, I feel like he would connect that back to Johann. But at this point, Lunge is kind of just doing his own thing for his own means. So I don't know if we can trust that he's going to follow the trail exactly or how many steps behind or forward he is. But basically, she vouches for Tenma, saying that she knew he was at the warehouse with the arsonist and that when she got there, he fled the scene, right? So what did the one guy said that the suspect is an extremist and he turned himself in while mentioning something about a flame for a race's festival. Well, the race is the master race, according to him. And the flame would be them setting fire to the Turkish district. So glad they stopped him. Glad that all got taken care of. But he asks her about things and she goes home and then he asks if she knew Dr. Tenma and she says no. So it's such a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, you have all of the people that Tenma helped. You have all of them vouching for him. Like, they all vouch for him. They're all like, oh, no, we don't know him, everything. Like, the people were talking about him in the Turkish district, and the moment it was brought up he was a murder suspect, they were like, nope, no clue. Who are we talking about? Like, the double-edged sword of it is they're vouching for him, which is good because it doesn't get him caught, but they can't talk about all the good he's done to clear his name because that would mean that they had lied to the police. So it's so frustrating because you want her to be like, yeah, I wanted her to just turn around and be like, yes, I know Dr. Tenma. He saved my life. He saved me from Johann. He rescued me from getting murdered alongside my parents. He's a great person. He's trying to protect the Turkish district. Like, you want her to say all these things about him that are good, that could make him have a better name, but she can't say them because then it will out and possibly put him in more danger. So, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating because you as the audience want to see him get validated and get released from being a suspect, but yet the circumstance is not allowing for it. And it's very taxing. It's just, God, it's frustrating. So yeah, and so I like the one guy was like, she looked like a hooker. That one guy like wearing those clothes makes me think she's a hooker. Again, the idea of outward perception and how we think of others based upon how they look. That is the thing, because Rosso himself looked like this sweet, charming little old man, and then we find out he was an assassin. Nina looks like she's very innocent, but she had a gun strapped to her thigh and was ready to kill someone. So yeah, it's just the idea that you can't judge a book by its cover. It's just all outward perception. And this episode kind of messes with that. And this episode on the outskirts, for example, seems like just a straightforward episode where you're like, oh, nothing crazy is going to happen in this. We're just getting a recap of what Nina's been up to the last, few months. And no, instead it just takes your heart and rips it out and stomps on it. So I really liked this episode a lot. I really liked it. That's the one thing about this series. The one thing about this series is that we've been talking about it with episode 13 because a lot of people said people didn't like episode 13. I was like, I loved episode 13 with Schumann. And the thing of it is, this monster kind of has, again, you talk about the monster and the ED splitting in two. This series splits in two, right? You have half of the series is following Tenma and his pursuit of Johann, and there's all this action and tension and horror-esque elements. And then the other half is doing this character work and studying not only the people during this time period, but the people during the times, during everything. It's interesting to see that it's rare that a series can have a main plot, but then the subplot is just as intriguing and just as powerful. That's kind of the thing about it. And so, yeah, the detective says these people are all really loyal to Tenma. Like, I wonder why. And then she sees Mr. Rosso, and I honestly was a little confused at first. Because I was like, who's this guy? Who is he? I guess, okay, she did give him a hug. At least in this series, in this episode, she did give him a hug. If anything, they got to at least hug once, and she got to show her care for him before moving on. I'm glad about that. That's like, okay, good. Good deal. Good, glad to see it. Right? And they're able to see. And then, of course, he doesn't eat anything. He just has the coffee with the sugar, and he lets her eat all the food. Because he knows she's been through a lot. And he understands. That's the thing. Seeing her in that outfit, he doesn't question it because at this point, it makes sense now. At this point, he knows what she's been up to and knows what she's been planning or has an idea of why she's been going to a shooting range. And he completely understands what she's there for. And so he doesn't judge her, which I like. He just lets her go. It's weird. I don't at all ship them. It's very much like a father-daughter sort of relationship. But I wanted them to go to the movies together. I wanted them to be able to see it together, but she knows she has to go. And she can't do that. It's so tragic, right? But then he adds the 5 sugars and she laughs at him. And he says, unsweetened coffee isn't good at all. Being like a world without sweetness is no good. Like, I like that idea that he realizes that a world without kindness is no good. Without kindness and compassion, that world is no good. And it took him a long time to realize that for himself. It's just, oh God, it's just, we'll talk about it with Tenma then by the end of this, and that makes her laugh. And he's like, this is the first time you've laughed in a couple days. He's like, why is it so strange? And so she comes to him looking for a job, and he gives her a job at the restaurant. I'm just a countryside Italian restaurant. We'll see how busy it gets. And it does get busy. I'm also like, dude, what happened to your other workers? Were you by yourself this whole time? How did that work? I guess maybe somebody quit and he needed somebody hired, but Restaurant Rosso. And again, if you look at the font on Restaurant Rosso, it's 2 different fonts. The one font is green and looks very like traditional, and then one is like a signature. So if we're going with this idea that everyone has 2 personalities inside of them, everyone has 2 different identities, then you have Restaurant Rosso, they're separate as well. So, and the Rosso's in red like blood. So, meaning kind of tying to his assassin part. I don't know if there's any symbolism to it, but that's what I'm picking up. So, that's rather interesting. I like it. And then the guy comes in, right? And he explains everything to her, and my cousin's a server, so she would probably like understand all this. But yeah, being a waitress is not easy. I volunteered a few times for a club to be a waitress for a restaurant. It's not easy. It's not. I think I could do the server part like with the plate she's talking about, but you got to keep track of a lot of things as a server and a waitress or waiter, and it's a lot. It's not easy, right? And you have to have customer service skills. You got to be kind to people. Like, you know, it's my cousin's not exactly the most extroverted person, so it's been a good experience, I feel. But yeah, and then the one guy comes in and he serves her. So I do like that. Again, Rosso's kind of like a father figure. Like all these guys hit on her, which is very typical. And he's like, no, he's like, leave my waitress alone. Get out of here. Don't go home with them. But it's established that Rosso is a good member of the community, and he knows all these people because they talk about watching movies with him and him crying and seeing all that stuff. So he's been involved in the community. He's not like a shut-in himself. He's interacted with all these people. But yeah, it's, you know, as a female viewer, there are parts of this episode I was like, just roll my eyes at, like the way some guys act and stuff. But it's like, what do we do? There definitely is a standard. And I feel like I sound very cliche when I say it's sexist, but it kind of is. Like, I don't feel like the women patrons at a restaurant go and oogle a man, you know? And I can't say that because it may have happened, but more often than not, the generalization is that it doesn't happen with women at restaurants, unless that's something that is thematic there. I don't know, but I just kind of roll my eyes at scenes like this, and it's like, okay. But Anna also shows in these moments that she is quite capable. Like, she seems like he's like, oh, you're a waitress here. Like, it seems that at first some of the patrons don't feel like she maybe will be able to do everything, that she's just a pretty face. But then she kind of proves them wrong by doing that she's very capable. She learns quickly, she adapts, and she's able to do things very handedly without being told over and over again. She picks up things quick, right? And what's also interesting is there was a line that Rosso said at the beginning where he's like, oh, you should smile more. And it was funny because my knee-jerk reaction is to get kind of offended by that when people are like, oh, you should smile more. And it's just like, there's been like a lot of push against that type of, rhetoric where, women don't tell men, oh, you should smile more. Like, it just kind of pushing back against that rhetoric. But it's fine in this episode because Rosso comes at it from a place of, not a place of like sexual prowess or anything. He's coming from a place of, when he says you should smile more, he's like, you should be happy. He's like, you clearly have a good life in front of you. You should enjoy that. So for him, it's not any kind of advance. It's just telling her that she should enjoy life more. And I'm fine with that. That's fine. So it is what it is. But it's just funny how this series, it dates itself just a wee bit. But it's not bad or anything. I could see how maybe you could go like the full on like offensive route with it being like, how are these guys at this restaurant gawking at her? But I'm like, it's okay. I can tolerate it. I just kind of roll my eyes and be like, what have we not seen? But anyway, so her going forward, working at the restaurant, everything, they've got all this service and everything. And then he's like, I didn't catch it. I love Rosso. Rosso's just a great character. And he watches out for her. It's wonderful. And everybody's just laughing and having a good time. And he talks about the movie. They're playing Summertime. Which, God, the fact they're playing that movie seems like such a call to the fact that this good time is about to end. That's the impression I got from this episode, was that it's summertime, like halcyon days, everything's fine. Things are not going to be fine after this episode. I just get the impression that this was the final push of, okay, things are about to go down a dark path. This was our last little enjoyable episode before we go all in. And that's kind of frightening. Just a wee bit frightening, right? But yeah, he says they're playing Summertime at the Masterpiece Theater. And I kind of like, part of it is like, he's like, Frankfurt has a lot of movie theaters. And talking about wanting to go see it. He's like, I've seen it on TV. I cried so much. And so he goes to like, talks about Venice, and he's like, I'd like to show you Venice sometime. When he said that, I was like, oh, I thought maybe he was dying at first. I was like, is he dying, or is there a reason? Like, is it tied to the food? Does he have a condition? We don't know. Is something bad going to happen to him? There was just this little, the moments he said he'd like to show her Venice, there was like this little thin veil of unease that I felt the rest of the episode. And then it hits you what the deal is about him being an assassin. That's when it all comes out. But for a while I was like, oh, this is really tense. I don't know how to feel about this. And then you realize what the episode is trying to do, and you're like, oh God. But yeah, him wanting to show her Venice. He's like, we could go see it. And she's like, we just don't have time. She has to go do something else. I love her outfit with the vest. It's very 90s, very cool. And she offers to do things for him, and he's like, no, it's fine. I can clean this out. And then she makes the comment where he asks her where she's been and what she's been doing. And she's like, I've been learning from a man named Winkle. And Rosso knows Winkle, which, again, should have been foreshadowing that he's used a gun before. I wondered that when he said that, oh, Winkle's a good man. I was like, why, especially after he said guns were terrible, I'm like, well, then why would you know Winkle unless it's just a small, tight-knit community? But the fact that he's probably gone to him for weapons before or something with training or something would be how he knows. And he probably has found out from Winkle about her. So yeah, it all makes sense by the end of the episode. And he's like, oh, you go to his place. He's a good guy. And she just stares at him, and that's when she asks him, like, what are your thoughts about guns? And we cut to her at the practice at the shooting range. And seeing her, and she says, have you ever fired a gun before, Mr. Rosso? And the moment he stops at that and looks back, he says, guns are terrible. Just seeing one makes me tremble all over. But he's an assassin. He's killed people. But he let that go. It makes me think of two things. It makes me think of Christopher Lee, the actor, because he was a professional assassin before himself during World War I, World War II before he became an actor. And then I think of my grandfather. My grandfather was in World War II, and he was in the Navy, and he fought outside of Iwo Jima. And my dad, he passed when I was very young. But my dad said that when he got home from World War II, he didn't touch a gun again. And he wouldn't talk about it. And it was like, and it just like makes you so emotional. You're like, oh. Because yeah, you get the idea of like how horrible that is. And the idea, what he tells her at the end where he's like, killing is easy if you forget the sweetness. If you think the world is a dark and cruel place, yeah, it's easy to kill because you don't realize the good that's in it. And it's like, oh my God, like it just tears you up. But I was like, oh no. The moment he said that, I was like, no, he's fired a gun before. He didn't answer her question, right? He just said they were terrible, but he didn't tell her whether he'd shot one or not. But yeah, I remember hearing my dad say like, no, the moment that your grandfather came home, he never had a gun again. Wouldn't touch one. And I was like, oh. So yeah. And then what she thinks about in that moment is that she can't fire that gun, right? She can't fire the gun. But what gets her to that point is thinking of all the bad things that he's done. So for Anna, the idea that she doesn't want to kill, and her motivation is the bad that he has done. But here's the thing with that. All of that shooting range scene and everything was before she found the note on the water tower. It was before all of that, right? So for her, the water tower scene is the moment where she's like, oh, she's like, maybe he has a split personality. Maybe he's not as cruel as I'm making him out to be. Maybe he doesn't have a choice. He doesn't know what he's doing. So for Anna, she wants to believe that he has this sweetness in him. It's just some outside force, some internal force is making him do the things that he does. So it's curious. We see like her reasoning. She had to, in order to even think about killing Johan, in order to even think about shooting, she had to go to a dark place without the sweetness. And that's kind of where Tenma is right now. He's getting to that dark place without that sweetness too. But what kind of drove her back, trying to tell Tenma, like, no, we can have compassion on him because there's more to it than that. He's just not a heartless monster. There's something else there. Now, whether that's true or not, that's the big question, right? But, God, the way that this show, like, connects things is so damn good. I'm like, oh my God. And then, yeah, she goes, and that's her motivation. That's what makes her think. And then he gets another thing of the sugar, and she passes it forward to him. And at this point, they're just drinking the coffee at this point. Now, the scene where he's drinking the coffee and she makes the pasta, and she's making the pasta, he's training her to cook, and he asks her what she tastes in it. And it's like not the first time. And she says that she tastes the garlic, the parsley, and the olive oil. She can taste that. And he's like, the flavors of everything else you put in there disappeared, didn't they? And she says, yes. He's like, then that's not a real pasta dish. So the message there of saying that the pasta, that you should be able to taste all you put in. And I was curious what that meant in that moment, like the idea of that if something's perfect, you get all aspects of it, you can understand all aspects of it. And I didn't know if that was relating to this concept of you're not a real human unless you understand all different facets of it. Like you can't understand humanity until you understand, it's like sometimes when you meet people, you only see and experience certain sides of them. And until you see all of it and are able to experience all of that person, you're not going to be able to fully understand them as a human. Maybe that's what it's referring to, because the idea that she only sees, like we only see, as of right now, the side of Johan that is a cold-blooded murderer and kind of a psychopath or a sociopath. But we don't see the full picture of him. We've seen a glimpse that he's come from the Czechoslovakia border and he's came from a place of just living hell. But we don't know what's going on in Johan's head. We don't truly know. So, and that kind of connects to Rosso being like, you know, you see me as this humble Italian restaurant owner. You see what you see, but you don't know me fully. You're not able to experience everything about me completely because I've not told you everything about my backstory. So I don't know if it's connecting to that. It might be. That might be like a little thing saying you don't really understand humanity unless you see all sides of it. Maybe that's referring to the pasta dish and she just can't quite wrap her head around it. But no, the moment she looks in saying the bath's free. So she was living with him. They were living in the same place. Like he let her have room and board above his restaurant. Cool. And the moment she comes in saying the bath is free and he's just in front of the TV, like just watching the movie and crying. That's what got me. I was like, no, because we've established he's this sweet man and seeing him get emotional and cry, I can't watch it. I've got to skip over it in this part. I can't do it. He's like, I couldn't believe there was such a movie when I was young. Like, he feels like he's wasted all this time. And that's so sad. Ugh. Like, it gets me. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, it just feels like he wasted all this time not realizing how good the world was. And all that had and all the possibilities it had. And now he's regretting, like, he spent all this time without knowing so. And she says, you always cry when you watch movies. I'll go back to that scene. He says, when I was young, I wanted to see them. I never had time to watch movies. And then he's like, I should have eaten a lot of good things then. But I can't remember the taste of anything from that time. Yeah, he's like, I wasted all this time killing and doing these awful things when I wasn't enjoying the world like what I should have been. He's like, I thought the world was this cruel place, but he's like, it really wasn't. It didn't have to be. I could have done like that man did and just add the sugar and made it better myself. Instead, I got bogged down in this idea that the world was just this cruel place and this is the only thing I could do. But he's like, that's not true. And it took me too long to realize it. And he's like, I didn't know the taste of sugar. And she's like, and then that's when he says he did the background check on her and why she was there. And she's like, I wanted you to tell me something. Like how she's like, I wanted you to tell me how to kill someone. And the moment, like, it's so crazy because his face changes and his demeanor changes. Like when he goes back to being like, I know why you're here and were you trying to use me? And then you find out that at the end of the day, she didn't want to use him because she realized what a good person he was and she didn't want to drag him into that world again. She's like, I see why you left it and I don't want to bring you back. And he's just like, he doesn't want her to be there at all either. And so we get this idea that there were 3 different murder cases and there's a lack of evidence. And they're like, my professor had a theory that a professional assassin killed all of them. And that it was him. And then him just kind of like cracking his neck, like just, okay, we're going to tell this story about my life. You ready? And him saying, how many people do you think I killed? He's like, the truth is, I don't remember myself. And he looks so different. He looks like a totally different person. He's like, I don't remember how many. And Nina just looks horrified. When I was a kid, before I knew it, I was the member of the organization. He's like, theft, blackmail, anything you could think of. He's like, in the end, I became an assassin. Just being like how he just got swallowed up into this world and didn't even think that there was anything beyond it. And then that's when he went to kill the man who had the sugar in broad daylight. He's like, that's what made me stop killing people. Something so simple, just realizing that it didn't have to be this way and that I could be enjoying life like this man was instead of just taking lives. Oh, y'all, I was done at that point. I was like, I can't do it. And poor Nina. He's like, do you have to go? And she nods. I wish she'd gave him a hug. I wish she'd given him a hug. I really wish it. He's like, killing people is easy if you can forget the taste of sugar. That line, yeah. Ugh. He's like, you can kill people if you think that there's nothing good in the world or anything worth living, but the moment you have an ounce of compassion, then it's not easy anymore. Damn. My shoulders are all tensed from this episode because I feel like I was like this the whole time. Oh my God. This episode got me. This episode got me. I thought walking into this episode, it was going to be a throwaway filler episode in between arcs of just, oh, here's what Nina's been up to. Not to say that Eva and Lunge's episode was like that. It definitely wasn't filler because it's setting up their characters who are clearly going to be important in the story. So that wasn't a filler, but you know, Tenma wasn't in this episode at all. And at first I was like, oh, we're just going to see what Nina's been up to. And we did, but oh my God. It was so much. And I feel like that this message that Rosso has gave her about making sure that you don't lose that sweetness. I'm so curious now because I think she's going to try to help Johan now before she won't kill him unless she has to, but she's going to try to reach out to him and be like, it doesn't have to be this way. There is another way. You don't have to keep doing this. Like, come away with me, do whatever. The question is going to be with Tenma. Is Tenma going to hesitate or is he going to try to immediately shoot Johan? I still think he's going to hesitate. I don't think he's going to try to shoot him. I don't know. But I feel like I feel like at the end of the day, Tenma's not so far gone that he would just kill him without thinking. I think he's going to have compassion, but then the repercussions of that, what will happen, I don't know. But oh, I was a mess this episode. I was like, Monster, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep doing this. So, oh man. Well, I think I'm going to need some more coffee with maybe 5 splashes of creamer instead of sugar. Maybe that's the case. I'm going to need that. Maybe need another Werther's after that. Need some sweetness for sure. But before we go, I would like to say a special thank you to Patreon. Thank you all so much for helping me be able to watch this show. Thank you to Anthony for giving me the files to be able to watch this. I appreciate it. But also thank you to our philanthropy tier, to Edgar, to Dana, to Anime Annie, to Larry Manning. Thank you all so much for the extra support this month. I really, truly appreciate it. I am very, very lucky and grateful that you all support me so that I can do what I like doing and talk about this show. But whew, I'm going to go now and get some more coffee and maybe rewatch the episode and maybe cry some more. So I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction discussion. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. Please, no spoilers, but I'll be back next week and we'll see what happens with Anna, with Tenma, and everyone else for the next episode of Monster. Bye.